Today's speaker is David Bors. David has been in public service for over 45 years, having served most recently as the Chief of Police for the City of Woodstock from January of 2009 to December of 2011, and previously as a senior officer and member of the command staff of the Cherokee County Sheriff's Office from 1993 to 2009, where he held the rank of major. He also served for 23 years in the United States Army in the Military Police Corps and retired in 1991 as a lieutenant colonel. He's a graduate of the Southern Police Institute at the University of Louisville and holds 2 Masters of Science degrees, one in public administration from Georgia College and State University, and the other in criminal justice from Jacksonville State University. He's a member of the adjunct faculty of criminal justice at Kennesaw State University, has previously taught at Reinhardt and at Georgia State University, and is a post-certified general instructor. As of August 2013, he has given this presentation to various civic groups in North Georgia, including several Tea Party organizations, the Republican Women's Clubs, Optimist Clubs, the Retired FBI Agents Association of Atlanta, and the Jewish American War Veterans. Finally, he offers an 8-hour training program entitled Islamist Ideology: Does it conflict with our law enforcement mission? That is given to area police organizations. To date, these include the Georgia Association of Chiefs of Police, the Carrollton Police Department, the Dawson County Sheriff's Office, the Hinesville Police Department, the Nashville, Georgia Police Department, the Morvan Police Department, and the Gwinnett County Police Department. I want you all to join me in welcoming David Bors.
Well, thank you for that introduction, and it's a delight to be here. I know for most of you this is probably the first time you've heard this presentation, and you're not alone. Unbeknownst to me, my wife just walked in, and it's the first time she's heard it, so I blow this, believe me, I will hear about it. If I always give a disclaimer before I give a presentation. I'm still attempting to overcome a lifetime addiction of full-time employment, so it may take me a while to get used to it. But I give these presentations, or I put this particular presentation together to get ready for the 2014 election season. It's terribly important that those who are running for office, and I'm glad we have 2 here tonight, understand the nature of this threat. Amen. And also, I think that they owe us what they intend to do about it. If we're going to send them up to Washington in particular, and down to the Capitol, there are issues that are facing us that they need to be concerned with, as we do. So without further ado, I would like to present you the information that hopefully will give you some food for thought on how we can prod our elected officials to protect our Constitution, because it is under a threat. I think this is probably what best describes what we are facing right now, is deliberate indifference on the part of those who are serving us in our nation's capital, and the part of many of those who are serving us in our state house. And nobody really understands this threat because we're not talking about it. We know something is wrong, but certainly at the federal level, they're not talking about it. Now, I was asked before the presentation tonight what got me interested in this. It's because I'm convinced we're being deceived. And I think that it started for me probably a little bit later than some of you, but it was in 2009 when we had the Fort Hood shooting. And it was labeled workplace violence. And it's still being called that. For some reason, we just cannot call it what it is Islamic terrorism. Now, we've been so lulled into political correctness that we're almost ashamed to call it for what it is. Because certainly we're going to be called out by others if we do. We're going to be called Islamophobes, we're going to be called racist, and I have. So I know that it puts you in a very discomforting position, but nonetheless, we need to be able to call it for what it is. So willful blindness. Hopefully I can take off some of the blinders for you and open your eyes to just how prevalent this threat is, and certainly we're just going to scratch the surface tonight. I don't know how well you can see that back there because of the light, but this is a bus out in Seattle, and the FBI posted photographs of international terrorists that they had an arrest warrant for this summer, in June of this year. And they were offering a $25 million reward for any information that would lead to the arrest and capture of those individuals. Now keep in mind that we have a federal arrest warrant for all of these people. So they've had at least some judicial review. Now you wouldn't think that that would be a problem, but for one at least Representative Jim McDermott, it was a problem. In fact, he demanded that those pictures be taken down because it was racist. Because all of the photographs were taken of Middle Easterners. There were no white folks up there. There were no black folks up there. Just Middle Easterners up there. Now that should tell you something. International terrorists primarily come from there. And yet he thought it would lead to profiling and the Muslims in his community would suffer. So as you would expect, the federal government, the FBI caved and took the photographs down. So now we cannot even publicize the pictures of those people who are wanted in response to international terrorism. Now, I'm going to be touching on these four topics tonight. First of all, how members of the Muslim Brotherhood have penetrated our federal government. Secondly, how Islamism, the political aspect of Islam, has penetrated our legal system. Thirdly, how our military and federal law enforcement officials are not being properly trained because their training has all been purged. And lastly, how our educational system has been impacted by the effects of Islamism. Well, first, some background. I understand that you have not had a presentation to date here on this topic, so bear with me. Muhammad received the verses that comprise the Quran between 610 and 632. For the first 12 years, he was in Mecca, followed by the remaining years in Medina. The first verses that he received were peaceful verses when he was in Mecca. When he went to Medina, things changed. The verses he received were all violent verses. In particular, chapter 9 of the Quran is an extremely violent chapter that tells, kill all unbelievers. Kill them. Now you might ask, if the Quran is a perfect book, which verses take precedent? Those verses that he received later trump or abrogate those verses he received earlier. So it's in the theology. It's in the theology. In fact, Muhammad was a warrior himself. He participated in numerous battles, and he planned others. He took over by force the Arabian Peninsula. And upon his death, his followers picked up the mantle and initiated a period of conquest by force. Here's the Arabian Peninsula right here. And his forces went out and took over the countries, the areas of northern Africa, which was primarily populated by Christian and Jewish tribes. Went across the Straits of Gibraltar into Spain, and then finally into southern France. And then they went eastward through the Middle Eastern countries, Israel, Syria, Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, and then through India. All of that took about 400 years. All of it was done by force. Islam or Muslims were never under threat by anybody. Now, we're often told that all of this happened in response to the Crusades. Well, your first test question is, when did the first Crusades take place? Can anybody tell me?
The 11th century.
1095. Well after this had been done. Can anybody tell me what the purpose of the first crusade was? Well, it was initiated by Pope Urban of the Catholic Church to open up Jerusalem so that Jewish and Christian pilgrims could return and worship there, because it was under the domination of Muslims. So when anyone tells you that the Crusades started all this, they're not telling the truth. All of this was done well before the Crusades started. So what we are here for is a quick overview of Islam's history of imperialism. Roughly for the first 1,000 years after Muhammad died, from 622, or when he left Mecca for Medina, from 622 to 1683, was a period of violent conquest. It wasn't until 1683 that Muslims were finally defeated and pushed back at the gates of Vienna. Can anybody tell me the date of 1683 when Muslims were pushed back?
September 11th.
September 11th, 1683. Remember this, dates have significance for them. It is no coincidence that we were attacked on September 11th, 2001. They remember. So what followed was a period of dormancy or regrouping when Islam changed, became more cultural or secular, if you will. All of those Muslim soldiers went back, regrouped into the Middle East, and basically were under the influence of European colonialism until 1924. 1924 was when the Ottoman Empire, or the last caliphate of Islam, was disbanded by Turkey. So what we have now is the new period, the one we're in, and that is a period of revival. It started in 1928 with the birth of the Muslim Brotherhood, and we'll start talking about that in just a moment, and carries on to the present. Now I say down here, this constitutes the rebirth of Salafism. What's Salafism? Salafism is the belief that true Islam was practiced right here between 632 and 661. And what they're pushing is a return back to the way things were during that golden period that immediately followed Muhammad's death. That's what you see being played out right now. That's what you see being played out in the Middle East between those Muslims who basically want to be left alone and those who are pushing for this reform or revival back to those golden years right after Muhammad died. So what we're left with that is facing us, on the left, we're well familiar with those who use violence against us. There are many of them, foreign terrorists, Al-Qaeda, for example, which our government claims is on the run. We've had numerous lone wolf or independent attacks within our borders since 9/11, some 65 plots and attacks. Jamaat al-Fuqra is a local group that's located right outside of Commerce, Georgia, and one outside of Jessup, Georgia. It's under the influence of a Pakistani cleric. They are primarily U.S. citizens who were converted to Islam in our prison system, and many of them also converted within the military. And they follow jihadi Salafism. Remember, Salafism is a return back to those basic beliefs, and yet, except they believe we need to do it through violence, direct attack. We're well familiar with that. We know what Boston did to us. We know what 9/11 did to us, and numerous other attacks in between. But what we're not familiar with is a nonviolent approach, and I submit to you this is the real danger. This is a national security problem. It is a threat to our Constitution. And I hope our elected officials are listening to this, because you can do something about it. And it's going to take you guys doing something about it. We have numerous Islamic front groups in our country right now, they've been here since 1963, who are advocating a return back to those golden years right after Muhammad's death. And they're working very hard to subvert our Constitution. They are backed heavily by our chief ally, or one of them in the Middle East? No. Saudi Arabia is not our ally. All they do is turn on the oil spigot. Every time you top off your car, money is going to sponsor what I'm going to be talking about for the rest of the evening. The primary advocate is the Muslim Brotherhood. The very organization that our administration was trying to link up with in Egypt claimed it was a moderate organization. Now, I don't use the term moderate because it begs the question, moderately what? Moderately violent, moderately peaceful, moderately patriotic. This is a fundamentalist group. A fundamentalist group, and we'll take a closer look at them in just a moment. They too follow beliefs of Salafism, a return back, except they don't use violence. Right now, they are very content to try to use the political system, our social system, our legal system, our educational system to subvert us. And that's what we'll be talking about. Well, there is their creed. I don't think Barack Obama has read this. If he has, he's overlooked it. It hasn't changed since 1928. Jihad is our way, and death for the sake of Allah is our greatest aspiration. Martyrdom. That's what they believe. Now, this particular document explains what they're up to in our country. This document was used as evidence in a federal trial in 2009 to convict members of the Holy Land Foundation for the illegal transfer of funds from the United States to Hamas. And this was part of the court documents and were not contested by the defense, by the way. Now, what does it say? It tells us in their words what they intend to do to us. Now, I ask you this. If your enemy is going to tell you what they're going to do, shouldn't we pay attention? Now, we've done this. We've made mistakes in the past, haven't we? Karl Marx, Adolf Hitler, even Osama bin Laden, we declared war on us. We did not pay attention. We need to pay attention to this. There it is, the Ikhwan, the Muslim Brotherhood. They must understand that their work here is a jihad to destroy us, to sabotage our country, to sabotage our miserable house by our own hands with our help, and with their own hands or their efforts. That's what they're saying. They're going to use us to help them, so that America is eliminated. That's very clear, isn't it? That's very clear of what they intend to do. And then they have a few words of admonishment to their own followers. Unless you understand this, you're not up to the task. Understand what this fight is about. And it was drafted by a very senior Muslim Brotherhood official, and it has yet to be repudiated by any Muslim Brotherhood organization in our country, because they're still following. So, let's take a look how high they are and how deep they've penetrated our government. Well, the first figure is someone that you're probably well familiar with, Uma Abedin, or Uma Weiner, married. She's a former representative, Weiner, from New York. She was on the staff of Hillary Clinton when she was the Secretary of State, and she served as her Assistant Chief of Staff, very high-ranking official in our Department of State. Let's take a look at Uma Abedin and her background. She served on the board, the executive board of the Muslim Student Association when she was in college. You're probably saying, well, so what? The Muslim Student Association was the first Muslim Brotherhood organization organized in America in 1963. It promotes a Salafi agenda on our college campuses. And it makes sure that only one side of the story is told on our college campuses, and that people like me don't get an opportunity to speak because we're labeled as racist and Islamophobic. So we're silenced on our college campuses. And yes, the Muslim Student Association is alive and well in Georgia, at UGA, Georgia State, Georgia Tech, Georgia Southern, numerous college campuses here. So she was an executive on that, but she's also the assistant editor of the Journal of Muslim Minority Affairs. That is a Saudi Arabian publication that is the mouthpiece for a Saudi Arabian program called Muslim Minority Affairs, which is a program to introduce Muslims incrementally in countries to take them over. This is the Saudi Arabian government sponsoring this. And she's the assistant editor for this document. And you can see what the journal promotes, what the ideology is. How about her mother, her father, other family members? Her mother is a senior member of the Muslim Sisterhood, a parallel organization of the Muslim Brotherhood, and these are her beliefs. She supports child marriages, marital rape. She supports female genital mutilation. Some people call it female circumcision. It is far worse than that. And the stoning for adultery. This is what fundamentalist Islam under Sharia law believe in. And her mother promotes it. And her father co-founded a women's college in Saudi Arabia, along with this individual who happens to be a designated global terrorist by our Department of Treasury. She's currently employed by the Hillary Clinton for President campaign and works for Clinton's foundation. Now, I know how difficult it is to get a top secret clearance. If my parents were tied to the Ku Klux Klan, I don't think that I would have gotten a top secret clearance, and yet she does. Because the skids were greased. The skids were greased. Now, while she was at the Department of State, she had an influence on our government. Tariq Ramadan is a great son-in-law of Hassan Banna, the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, and under her efforts, our government approved a visa application to allow him to come here and speak. He's a big-time speaker in Europe and promoting very fundamentalist Islamic beliefs. And then outreach training how the Muslim Brotherhood could win the election in Egypt. And they agreed with the Organization of Islamic Cooperation to impose blasphemy restrictions on our First Amendment. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Now, this particular individual down here is not terribly important. What is what he's trying to do. The blind sheik has been convicted by our government for the first World Trade Center attack in 1993. He's currently serving in a supermax, and the Muslim Brotherhood is actively trying to get his release from prison and return to the Middle East. And lastly, we know about the support of the Muslim Brotherhood for President Morsi. This is while she was in the State Department. But how about these six? These are all in Obama's administration, many of them in our Department of Homeland Security. Time doesn't allow me to address each one of them, but I will talk about this individual, Mohammed Majid. Yes, he is a member of the Counter-Violence Extremism Working Group in your Department of Homeland Security, and you're paying his salary. He's the president of the Islamic Society of North America. That is the largest Muslim Brotherhood group in this country. It is the umbrella organization. In fact, it was the first organization listed on that explanatory memorandum that I just showed you a few minutes ago that lists all of their groups in our country as their affiliates. It's also an unindicted co-conspirator during the Holy Land Foundation trial that I mentioned a few minutes ago. And yet, being the president of that group gets you into the White House. He too has a father that has very fundamentalist beliefs, a high imam in Sudan. And during the raid by our customs officers at the Al-Dulles Area Muslim Society Center, a very fundamentalist Islamic mosque, he was present during that raid. So he has some bad bona fides, if you will. FBI was so duped by him, they gave him an award for his cooperation. His congregation rose up in arms against him because they didn't know that he was cooperating with the FBI, and he went out of his way to assure his congregation that he really wasn't. He was just taking the FBI for a ride. And in 2010, he started the ball rolling with our Attorney General to purge our training material that's given to FBI agents, other federal law enforcement, and the military. And then he went to our Secretary of Treasury in wanting all restrictions lifted on zakat. Zakat is their form of a tithe. And under Islamic or Sharia law, there are 8 areas where this money can be given to, one of which is to support freedom fighters. That's against federal law. And they're trying to get that restriction lifted. Yes, sir, what's your question?
Did you indicate that the FBI was duped by this man?
Absolutely. Absolutely they were.
You don't think there was any cooperation inside the FBI to help this?
But all I know is they've changed their focus now because Congress had to enact a law that prohibits the FBI from dealing with any of the unindicted co-conspirators of the Holy Land Foundation trial. Other than that, the FBI would have continued to do so. And lastly, we know how Representative King was treated by the administration and Muslim groups when he opened hearings about the radicalization process in our country. So the common characteristics of all these people, all 6 of them, and even Abedin, is they all have ties to the Muslim Brotherhood. They've all made very critical statements against our policy with respect to terrorism. And anytime that they're ever challenged, they always claim, well, I must have been misinterpreted, even though it's all recorded. There be no doubt that the ultimate objective is to impose Sharia law here, and they support it. I do think that we can do better. And that's why it's going to take some elected officials with some kahunas when they go up there, is to stop this stuff from going on. Understand what they're doing to us, how they have penetrated our government. Now, we all know about how Obama has embraced Islam. I won't insult your intelligence by reading all of that. But certainly he is a friend of the Muslim Brotherhood and what they stand for. Most of that we'll talk in a little bit more detail in just a moment. Let's take a look at the legal system. Yes, sir.
I applaud what you are doing, and I'm going to tell you, since 2009, I have been calling our congressman to find out why they don't have the guts to bring Obama down back as far as 2009.
Good.
I applaud you, and I'm crying for what you're doing.
Well, you do know, finally, our representatives are trying to impeach Eric Holder. Maybe we'll get them to do it against the president. All right, let's take a look at how Islamism has infiltrated our legal system. You see how it's penetrated the highest levels of government. Now let's talk about our legal system. All right, this is just another form of jihad. Remember, they're not using violence. They're going to use our cooperation. They understand our law. They understand our Constitution. They understand the amendments, the guarantee, all of our freedoms, and they use them. Lawfare is using our filing frivolous lawsuits in civil courts to tie up or prevent people like me and others from speaking, from taking action against them. They don't have any expectation that they will be successful in these lawsuits. In fact, most of the time, after they're filed, they withdraw them. But in the meantime, the defendants have to spend millions of dollars defending themselves. That's part of what they're trying to do, is to bankrupt folks, to steer them into silence. Let me just give you an example of just one. The Flying Imams in 2006. There were 6 Islamic religious leaders who attempted to board a United flight, Indianapolis-St. Paul Airport. And before the flight, they were praying, chanting, shouting in Arabic. Some of the passengers understood Arabic and were very concerned with what they were saying. In fact, some of the crew was equally concerned. After they boarded the aircraft, they all split up. They all asked for seat belt extensions. None of them needed it. None of them were overweight, but those seat belt extensions had very large belt buckles. The thought was they were going to use these as weapons. So finally, after the crew refused to take off, they were removed and questioned and released. What people didn't know, at least at this time, that prior to the conference, they were told how to do this. This is just a test to see how far they could push the system. It was staged by the Muslim Brotherhood, promoted by the Muslim Brotherhood. So we know what happened. Muslim American society got all upset, demanded the an apology, Council of American Islamic Relations filed a civil lawsuit, which was settled out of court. Council of American Islamic Relations is another unindicted co-conspirator of the Holy Land Foundation trial. In fact, there are 309 unindicted co-conspirators of the Holy Land Foundation trial. Not one of them has been brought to justice by the Obama administration. They refuse to do so. So, elected officials, this is something that is worthy of investigation. Remember what we're told to say by law enforcement, aren't we? You see something, say something. And yet the people on that aircraft were sued. Were sued for saying something they felt that their safety was in jeopardy. Fortunately, that part of the lawsuit was dropped. We need legislation that will protect us, that if we see something and we say something, we're not going to be dragged into court. New York is the only state that has such protection. They tried to do it in 2007 at the federal level, but it waned. So we do not. You say something and someone objects to it, you can be sued. Let's take a look at the workplace. How was that impacted by their use of our law? In a company in Florida, they had a work rule instituted because of the Muslim employees that no pork products could be brought to the work site. One worker brought a bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwich, a BLT, and was sued. Dunkin' Donuts did not want to renew the contract of a Muslim employee because he refused to serve a sausage biscuit and was terminated. They were sued. Cab drivers, Indianapolis-St. Paul. By the way, Indianapolis-St. Paul has the largest Somali population in our country. In fact, the largest Somali population outside of Mogadishu. 35,000 Somalis. Clarkston, Georgia is going to get 3,000 this year, just down the road. Somali refugees. Anyway, cab drivers refused to transport passengers who were carrying alcohol. Cashiers at Target refused to handle any pork products during the meat checkout, and likewise at Sam's Club. All faced legal consequences. And then more recently, DHL is facing the possibility of a civil suit from CARE. Why? Because it will not allow all of its Muslim workers to go on break at the same time to pray together. It's taking a stand. The political correct crowd would say, why not? Why not? Well, I say the next thing they're going to ask for is foot baths, because they have to wash before their prayers. And then there's a program by CARE to increase the number of Muslim lawyers in our country, and is offering financial assistance to do that. All designed to tie up our legal system. Free speech, freedom of speech, First Amendment protections is under attack. We know what political correctness is. We can't say anything that would be offensive or critical of anybody. We're all supposed to get along. Especially, we better not say anything that's patriotic or favorable to Christians and Jews, because we'll be squelched. So I have no doubt that there are many well-intended people in our country that are just trying to promote social harmony. Let's all just get along. Let's not be critical. The problem is we are silencing the truth. We are silencing the truth because we're afraid of being called an Islamophobe or a racist. Let's see what they claim is blasphemous. This document, Reliance of the Traveler, is their code book, their legal book of Sharia law. It is recognized by both Sunni and Shia Muslims worldwide. It's been signed off on by all of the Islamic countries in the Middle East as being valid. So it has some clout to it. So what does their theology say about slander? Anything that you say to someone that he would dislike. Notice it doesn't say anything about whether it's a lie or a falsehood. It just says if you say anything to someone that they may dislike, constitutes slander. And tail-biting, tail-bearing, is saying anything about anybody else that might reveal something that he might resent about his past. So, if I claim that Muhammad is a pedophile, which he was, he married his last wife when she was 6, consummated the marriage when she was 9, that's a violation of U.S. law. It's also a truthful statement, but it would be considered slanderous under Islamic law. Don't say anything unless it benefits Islam. That's what's in the book. That's what's in the book. Well, you're saying, well, so what? Well, so what? Because now we have got the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, the largest voting bloc of Muslim countries in the United Nations, who came out with their Cairo Declaration. What did it say? That freedom of expression is okay as long as it doesn't violate what? Sharia law. And that all rights and freedoms pertain to us as long as they do not, are subject to Sharia law. And if there is ever a dispute, Sharia law will sort it out for us. So human rights can only be defined by what Sharia law grants human rights to be. Again, you're probably saying, well, so what? That's the Cairo Declaration, what would you expect? But the United Nations has adopted it. Resolution 1618 basically said that we need to combat intolerance and called on its members to criminalize anything that might lead to incitement to violence. Again, you're probably saying, so what? It's the United Nations. Well, our State Department and our President has bought into it. And has agreed to this. It's not law yet, because the treaty hasn't been ratified. But that's the direction. The bottom line is, that's a true statement. That we're going to find, if we're not careful, that we can't talk about Islam unless it's favorable. And now we have U.S. officials equating blasphemy rules to human rights violations or hate speech, if it leads to violence. And it should be punished criminally. You're probably asking, what U.S. official has said that? Just bear with me for a moment, and I'll tell you. Truth is no defense. It is offensive or causes discomfort. It doesn't make any difference if it's the truth. Just like my statement a moment ago. So what we have now under this is a test of consequences. If it leads to violence, it's the speaker's fault. Not the people who became violent. It's not their fault. It's the speaker's fault. Now, we do need to be vigilant. Under current law, slander means you must tell a malicious lie that causes some harm, financial harm or whatever. That's current law. But under blasphemy, saying the truth that might be offensive equals blasphemy, and therefore can be judged criminally. Remember, Obama has said this: the future must not belong to those who slander the Prophet of Islam. Who slander the Prophet. I slandered the Prophet under Islamic law a minute ago. He's a pedophile. Now, Manchester, Tennessee, in June of this year, this is how close we're coming. We had a meeting, a rally sponsored by a local Muslim group, invited the U.S. Attorney from the Department of Justice for the Eastern District, and he's on board. And he will apply hate crimes statutes to prosecute threats of violence against Muslims. Threats of violence. What does that mean? The problem of threats of violence means it can be a depiction, it can be a statement. Remember, all it takes is a video or a cartoon that can lead to violence. And he's gone on record to say he's going to prosecute. I was there. Fortunately, there were about 6,000 other people there that drowned him out. But this is what's being pushed. This is what's being pushed. So, Deborah Weiss is a constitutional lawyer, an expert on the First Amendment. Basically, there are 4 steps. We've already agreed to be sensitive. We want to get along. We already have restrictive guidelines, and I'll show you those in a moment. We already have Hillary Clinton going on record saying, well, we're just going to use some old-fashioned shaming against people who speak out. And we already have an assistant U.S. attorney who's going to criminalize any statements that lead to violence. So, you tell me if we're not in trouble. Let's take a look at Sharia law in American courts. There are already 50 court cases where Sharia law has been used in American courts. Now, these are cases presided over, presumably, by a U.S. judge who took an oath to support and defend the Constitution, but nevertheless allowed Sharia law to enter into his court. Nobody held a gun to his head. They did it voluntarily. And you can see the number of times. You can also see that George was not up there. Thank God. The problem with that is that most of those court cases involve family matters, domestic disputes within a Muslim family. Now, we already know that it takes the testimony of 2 Muslim women to equal the testimony of 1 Muslim man. That's also in Sharia law. So how do you think that a Muslim woman is going to fare in a court where Sharia law is used when it's just her word against a Muslim male, and they're fighting over custody for children? So the result of this is people are being deprived of due process when Sharia law is being allowed to be used in our court system. So, American law in American courts, ALAC, it's designed to prevent the use of any foreign law in an American court. U.S. law must be supreme. This is not part of sensitivity training, just getting along. There's a reason why our law must be supreme. And no other law, whether Sharia law, Roman Catholic law, or any law, should be used in our courtroom. Already, some states in our immediate area have enacted legislation that protects or prohibits the use of foreign law in their courts. And other efforts are being percolated in 20 states. So that leads me to Georgia. We've been fighting to try to get this law passed for 2 years. Now, you would think this would be a nonpartisan issue, wouldn't you? In a very conservative state like Georgia. Not so. Year before last, a movement was sponsored, our law was sponsored by Christian Coomer from Cartersville that would have prevented any foreign law in Georgia courts. Guess who stopped it after it passed the House Judiciary Committee? Your Speaker of the House, David Ralston, prevented it from coming to a floor vote so it could go over to the Senate. Your House Speaker has gone on record that he does not support this legislation, that he supports Sharia law in Georgia courts.
Where's he from?
Hmm?
Where's he from?
North of LJ. Republican Party this year passed a resolution that basically said that because we have 2 Supreme Court justices right now that have gone on record, Ginsburg and Kagan, that foreign law should have persuasive value in our court system, that we've got to put a stop to that, at least in Georgia. So that is the stand that the Republican Party has taken in our state for this year. Now, we can expect some pushback. Senator Josh McComb from Columbus is going to propose a constitutional amendment to our Constitution that would prohibit the use of any foreign law in Georgia. Now, we've got some pushback. Council of American Islamic Relations in Atlanta will push back. ACLU will push back. So will the Anti-Defamation League. A Jewish civil rights watchdog will push back. They don't think it's necessary, and I know that personally. I talked to the director, Bill Nygut, earlier this year to get his support. He said he would not support it. Atlanta businesses, banks, and law firms are heavily involved in financial transactions between our country and the Middle East. And we have some supporters. Act for America is a, yes sir.
You didn't talk about the clergy. You mean the clergy are going to push back?
Oh, you bet. You bet.
This is one that's going to stand.
You go up to Tennessee, while they were trying to enact legislation, they had both Jewish rabbis and Protestant pastors supporting or opposing the legislation. Yes, members of your cloth will come out against it. I gave a presentation down in Savannah to a Republican Party 2 weeks ago, and I had a Jewish rabbi who supports Palestine in attendance. And he too does not believe that this is needed. Jewish rabbi. By the way, if you ever wondered how the Holocaust happened, now you know. But this is our issue now. That's what I'm trying to leave you with. This is our issue. Are we going to do something about it, or when you leave here tonight, do nothing more about it? We can't be into denial anymore. Sorry I get passionate about this, because I see this creeping into our Constitution and threatening us in our very way of life. Okay, let's talk about our third topic, how our federal government just removes all reference to Islam when it comes to training our military and our federal law enforcement officers. All training has been purged. All training has been purged. It's been purged since 2011. be reminded of what the 9/11 Commission told us. What motivated the attackers was a jihadist ideology rooted where? Islamic law. That has been lying dormant, like I said. And now it's being revived anew. So that's what the 9/11 Commission concluded. Why can't our administration admit it? They can't do it. The language has changed since Barack Obama came to elected office. Here's the different words that were used. You can read them for yourself, and the number of times in the 9/11 Commission report. That is the last time that our federal government was honest with us. Ever since, whether it be an FBI document or intelligence document or the Fort Hood report on Nidal Hasan, you can see how the words just don't get surfaced again. They've been diluted, deleted, purged. Remember, the federal government gives guidelines of how you should speak. And they've issued guidelines at the federal level.
Now they're calling the Tea Party terrorists.
Yes. All right, why were the training manuals purged? Well, there's a letter that was sent to them. Senior official John Brennan. We all know who he is now. He's the, director of the CIA? But at the time, John Brennan was at the White House, and the letter was signed by some 57 Islamic groups, demanding that our training be changed. Demanding that our training be changed. And their complaints were that we were using biased training, false training, offensive materials. We already talked about what offensive means to them. They identified several specifics about classes, PowerPoints, what have you. And then they specified the agencies that were at fault. All the ones that are supposed to be protecting us. And their solution was, well, we need to have an interagency task force. The Counter-Violent Extremism Working Group, Majid Hassan, that I showed you, and others of acquaintances in the Muslim Brotherhood. And then they demand to purge the training. And then they demanded that anyone who attended all of this training must be retrained in the truth. And whoever did it must be disciplined. The instructors are to be disciplined. And let's make sure that this training never happens again. Those were the demands. What was the reaction? Yes, sir, the Attorney General said. We'll do it. And then John Brennan wrote back and said, yes, sir, we'll do it. And then finally, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs said, yes, sir, we'll do it. And here's a victim of someone who was disciplined for giving the training. Training that was approved by his superiors, and yet he's paying the price for it. His career is ruined. Let's turn now to the threat to our public education. Most of you probably either have children, grandchildren, or know people who are currently enrolled in our public schools. So hopefully this will hit home if the other material has not. Some schools are allowing Muslims to pray. And also are succumbing to their demands that Bible studies cannot be promoted, let alone held, within our public schools. Now, in case you don't know, moral relativism is alive and well in our education system. That there are no absolutes anymore of right and wrong. And that American exceptionalism is marginalized and not even mentioned. We're just another cultural alternative, just like everybody else. And if our children are not being taught that we are exceptional, how can we expect them to defend us later? As for Islam, well, it's just another alternative lifestyle. So stoning for adultery is just another alternative lifestyle. Female genital mutilation is just another alternative lifestyle. Honor killing is just another alternative lifestyle. And it goes on and on and on. That's what's being taught, or overlooked, I should say. That the terrorists are really just a couple of misfits. They're just rotten apples. That's not true. As I said, they are reverting back to the way things were. And oh yes, in Texas, non-Muslim girls were told to wear the burqa without parental notification. Now, I'm sure these young girls thought this was just a big joke, but it has significance, believe me. If there was ever a reason that we need to make sure that Common Core is defeated, it's because of this stuff that will be pushed by the federal government. And I implore those of you who are going to be our elected officials to make sure that you resist Common Core. Because this is a natural consequence of a federal government that supports this stuff. Public school textbooks. They convey a very pristine message of Islam. If you don't believe me, open them up. You go home, open up the textbooks that your children or grandchildren are using. There was a 2008 study conducted by the American Textbook Council and took a look at 10 different books and concluded that they just present an incomplete or confused view of Islam and totally misrepresent its foundation and threat to national security. This is what our kids are being taught. And of course, totally downplay or overlook Judaism and Christianity. Now you're going to ask, well, how does all this happen? Well, the Council on Islamic Education is a Muslim Brotherhood affiliate in California. It's since changed its name to the Institute on Religion and Civic Values. They thought that that would be a little bit more politically correct, and they vet all textbooks. The publishers send textbooks to them for review. And they do that because if they don't, then this group, the Institute on Religion and Civic Values, is going to squawk. It's going to claim they're Islamophobic or racist. And they don't want the publicity. So they send the textbooks for review and they adopt the changes. The founder of this, Mansouri, boasted he is able to vet public school textbooks by threatening the publishers. And this is what he also said, that he's waging a bloodless revolution in our classroom. Remember, by our own hands, they will defeat us. So, anything that's critical gets removed. The that's not all this group does. They promote practices, Muslim practices in our classroom, like prayer rooms, time for prayer. Train our teachers. And oh yes, there are supplemental materials that our teachers have. So in addition to the textbooks are the supplemental teachers that our teachers receive, and where do they get those? On the internet, World Wide Web. They can access them on any topic. So after 9/11, everyone wanted to know about Islam. And who's providing it? Saudi Arabia. Funds the supplemental material, pays for it. So the content of the supplemental material does not provide any information or understanding to our students about those topics. It just talks about how Islam is a religion of peace, how women's rights are promoted under Islam, and that nobody has anything to fear from Muslims. Now, I will tell you this, and I firmly believe this with all my heart. I believe the majority of Muslims in this country are peaceful and law-abiding and are here to get away from the very things that these guys are trying to promote. So I want to make sure that that understanding is clear. That it's the fundamentalists that are pushing this agenda. And remember this, a lot of people always ask me, why don't the peaceful ones speak out? Why don't they just say something? Well, if they do, what happens? They're labeled as an apostate. Apostasy under Islamic law is punishable by death. They also know that they have family members, many of them back in the Middle East, and they are susceptible to violence. And last, perhaps most importantly, why should they speak out against the Muslim Brotherhood when our very government supports them? That's why they don't speak up. Because they're afraid. Just like many of you are. And oh yes, they do support student activities in our schools. Just a couple of examples. Just a couple of examples. From the East Coast to the West Coast. Students required to participate in practices of Islam. And parents are not notified. So, there are other concessions we're making, and I don't have time to get into it. Sharia finance, our major banks and insurance companies are all have senior Muslim officials to make sure that loans are Sharia compliant. Foot baths. Before Muslims pray, they have to wash. They have to wash their hands, their arms, their feet, their legs. Foot baths. Foot baths are being installed in many of our universities at our expense. Likewise, prayer rooms. And they're even being installed in some of our secondary schools. Segregating men from women in athletic sports. Different times when you can use gym facilities. Public calls for prayer. There's a small village outside of Dearborn, Michigan that has allowed its ordinance to be modified so that Muslims can broadcast 5 times a day their call to prayer on the public address system, 24/7. Mosque construction project. We know about the 9/11 mosque. Mosques are meant to be constructed, was the first thing constructed anytime Muslims conquered a country. The mosque at the World Trade Center has significance. They consider it a victory. Many of our jurisdictions are allowing Muslims to pray in the open, blocking streets on Friday for public prayer. Just as they sign a symbol to them that they dominate. They dominate. They can pray in the mosque, just like we pray in our churches and synagogues. And oh yes, the American Society for Pediatrics, at least for a year, endorsed its members to perform female genital circumcision. and has since backtracked on that. Why? So that Muslim parents would not have to send their daughters over to the Middle East to have the procedure performed, but could have it done here. Chrislam, the blending of Christianity and Islam into one. Talk to your pastors about it. Talk to your pastors about interfaith dialogue attempts. This is all part of the by your own hands efforts to dominate and subvert our Constitution. So what's the impact about all this? All of this means empowerment. That we are a loving people, we will bend over backwards. But concessions mean appeasement. We ought to know they don't work. So empowerment represents how we aid, how we are aiding and abetting them to sabotage us. This is the threat we face. We're silenced by political correctness, so we can't even talk about the threat. We know about the violent side. I've told you a little bit about the Muslim Brotherhood and what they're up to, and what the United Nations is up to. We're under attack. And most of it, you don't even know about. When you leave here tonight, nothing has changed for you. And most of you forget about the presentation. I hope some of you will take it to heart, and the next time a public official asks for your vote, you ask them about this threat, if they even know about it. True story. At the Republican Jewish Coalition meeting earlier this year, Phil Gingrey was asking for votes. I asked him what did he know about the Muslim Brotherhood here in this country. He knew nothing about it. All he could talk about is the Muslim Brotherhood in the Middle East. 2 months later, I gave him a desk side briefing at his Marietta office, trying to bring him up to speed on it. 3 months after that, at the Holly Springs Tea Party meeting, again, I asked Phil Gingrey, what have you done about the penetration of the Muslim Brotherhood in our government? And he said, nothing. He's asking for your vote to be a U.S. Senator. Personally, I believe he doesn't deserve it. He knows nothing about this threat. So in conclusion here, this is infiltration of our government. It started under the Bush administration, there be no doubt about it. But it has magnified since Obama has taken office. This is part of their plan. They have a 4-phase plan to subvert our Constitution called the Underground Movement Plan. This is phase 4. And how can we effectively counter an enemy we can't even talk about? We can't even discuss or label. So this is how sabotage by our own hands is taking place. And slowly but surely, we are adapting Sharia practices in our country. Dhimmitud is the Islamization process of Christian and Judeo values. Let there be no doubt about it. It's to put us into a subservient position. So my next to last slide is, what can you do? What can you do? First of all, engage Muslims, but don't empower them. I know you have Muslims here in Forsyth County. The purpose of me being here tonight is to give you some thoughts of how you can question elected officials. Do that. They owe us an answer. Resist any efforts under the guise of religious protection to curtail freedom of speech. Encourage pastors and rabbis to start speaking out. They pretty much are ignorant of this threat too. In fact, they're succumbing to the dialogue. Demand that our local Georgia legislature support Josh McCoon, especially on the House side. when it gets transferred over out of the Senate. You have that constitutional amendment that prohibits foreign law in Georgia courts. Take a look at history books that your kids have, your grandchildren have. Read them. See how all this is being portrayed. And yes, there are some organizations you can Google and become active in. Act for America, the United West chapters get emails free to just bring you up to speed of what's going on in the country. And oh, by the way, be alert for wolves in sheep's clothing. The movement to press for Islam, the Olive Tree Initiative, and common word between you and us. There's nothing common between Christian Judaism and Islam. Nothing. All right. I know I've covered a lot of material tonight.